Have you ever wondered what might happen if something long forgotten was discovered by accident? Some objects were never meant to be found. When Mariana uncovered an old diary hidden inside the walls of her home, she had no idea she was opening the door to something that should have stayed buried forever. Get ready, because the story you're about to hear is dark, disturbing, and filled with moments where the line between dreams and reality disappears. Stay with me until the very end, but be warned, after this you'll never look at an old book the same way again. It was one of those afternoons when silence feels heavier than usual, as if the air itself was holding its breath. Mariana was alone in the old house she had inherited from her grandparents. Every corner carried the weight of time, the creaking doors, the faint smell of aged wood, and the unsettling sense that the walls remembered more than they should. While rearranging the guest room, she decided to move a dusty wardrobe that had stood untouched for years. That's when she noticed something odd. The paint on that section of the wall was darker, cracked like veins spreading across the plaster. Curiosity overtook her hesitation. With a screwdriver in hand, she chipped away at the brittle surface until part of it gave way. Behind it, there was a hollow space. Cold air poured out, unnaturally cold, as if it had been sealed away from time itself. Reaching inside, her fingers brushed against something solid. She pulled it out with effort, a heavy object wrapped in a yellowed cloth. Her heart raced as she unwrapped it. It was a book. Not just any book, but an old diary bound in dark, cracked leather stained with something that looked disturbingly like dried blood. The lock was broken, as if someone had forced it open years ago. A shiver ran down Mariana's spine. Something about the diary felt wrong, and yet it pulled at her, demanding to be opened. She sat on the floor, hesitated for only a moment, then gave in. The first page creaked as it turned. The handwriting was small and jagged, but legible. And the very first line made her stomach tighten. If you are reading these words, there is no turning back. At that exact moment, a sudden gust blew through the half-open window, snuffing out the weak daylight. Shadows crept over the room. Mariana's pulse thundered in her ears, but her hands refused to close the diary. She flipped to the next page, unaware that by doing so, she had awakened something that was never meant to be disturbed. Mariana ran her fingers over the fragile ink, trying to make sense of the jagged script. The diary smelled of damp paper and aged leather, a scent that clung to her like dust from another century. At first, the entries seemed harmless. Notes about lonely days in a secluded house, small details of life in isolation. But there was something in the tone, a heaviness that lingered between the lines. The writer spoke of strange noises at night, windows that slammed shut on their own, footsteps pacing the hallway, faint laughter that echoed at the same time every evening. Mariana exhaled with relief. Just the ramblings of a paranoid mind, she told herself. But the relief didn't last long. The further she read, the more the tone shifted. The mundane descriptions gave way to words dripping with fear. The voices won't let me sleep. They call my name when no one is here. My thoughts no longer belong to me. Her mouth went dry. The handwriting was firm, but every word seemed to hum with a strange energy, as though the page itself carried the writer's torment. Flipping ahead, Mariana froze when she stumbled upon a list. 10 names, maybe more. Some were violently crossed out, the ink pressed so hard it tore the paper. Next to a few names, small black crosses had been drawn. Her chest tightened. Who were these people? And why were some marked as if they'd been claimed? Unable to resist, she typed the names into her phone. One by one, the search results sent chills down her spine. Accidents, fires, unsolved disappearances. Each one was real. Each one had already died. Her trembling hands nearly dropped the phone. Then she noticed something she had missed before. At the very bottom of one page, in tiny, precise script, was a line written in Latin. She couldn't translate it, but the moment she whispered it aloud, a cold shiver rippled through her entire body. She heard it then, a whisper, faint but unmistakable. It echoed back to her, layered with a voice that wasn't hers. Panicked, Mariana slammed the book shut. But deep inside, she knew the truth. The diary wasn't simply telling a story. It was speaking to her. Mariana didn't sleep that night. She lay awake, staring at the ceiling, haunted by the list of names burned into her memory. By morning, exhaustion gave way to a dangerous curiosity. She returned to the diary, her hands trembling as she flipped back to that page. The list was still there, stark and unsettling. 10 names, maybe more. Some struck through so violently that the paper had torn, others untouched, as if waiting. Next to a few, the black crosses stood like grave markers. She traced a finger over one of them, Ana Beatriz. The ink was jagged, pressed deep into the page, almost carved rather than written. Again she searched online. Each name told the same story: death or disappearance, most under strange or unexplained circumstances. One woman had vanished walking home from church. Another had burned in a sudden house fire. Others were accidents no one could explain. Mariana's breath quickened. The list wasn't fiction. These were real people. She turned the page, hoping to find answers, but what she found was worse. Beneath one of the crossed-out names, scrawled in frantic handwriting, was a chilling line: "The harvest is nearly complete." Her chest tightened. She slammed the diary shut, but the words still echoed in her mind. Harvest? What did that mean? The house groaned as if responding to her fear. A sharp crack echoed from the wardrobe behind her, making her jump. The air felt heavy, pressing against her skin like damp cloth. Mariana bent to pick up the diary but froze when she heard it. A whisper. Soft. Close. Someone had spoken her name. Her throat locked. She spun around, but the room was empty. The diary slipped from her hands, falling open on the floor. Across the pages, new symbols had appeared, dark and twisted, etched as if burned into the paper. Her heart pounded so hard she thought it might burst. She wasn't alone anymore. That night felt endless. Mariana tried to convince herself it was just exhaustion, that her mind was inventing shadows. But as the clock crept past 3 in the morning, the air in her room grew suffocating, heavy enough to make every breath a struggle. She tossed under the blankets, desperate for sleep. And then she realized the diary wasn't on her desk anymore. It was lying open on her chest. Her scream caught in her throat as she shoved it off. The book hit the floor with a dull thud. The page it had fallen open to bore a single chilling sentence written in bold, deliberate strokes. Darkness does not wait for an invitation. A cold draft swept through the room, though the windows were shut tight. She could see her own breath misting the air. The curtains swayed gently, though there was no wind. And in the farthest corner of the room, a shape lingered, a shadow darker than the dark around it, as though it did not belong to this world. Mariana blinked hard, her eyes stinging with fear. When she looked again, the shadow was gone. But the air hadn't lifted. It pressed against her chest like a weight. And then she heard it, faint, deliberate. The sound of a pen scratching across paper. Her skin prickled. The sound wasn't coming from her room. It was coming from the hallway. She forced herself out of bed, each step on the wooden floorboards louder than the last. The hallway stretched before her, bathed in the pale glow of moonlight through a window. The sound grew louder. In the dining room she found the source. The diary lay open on the table, a fountain pen gliding across the page by itself. No hand guided it, but words spilled forth in a furious rush. When it finally stopped, Mariana edged closer, her pulse roaring in her ears. The ink was fresh, glistening under the moonlight. The message was short. Mariana. It was the first time the diary had written directly to her. And in that moment, she knew she wasn't just reading its story anymore. She was the story. Mariana could no longer fool herself. The diary wasn't a relic of the past. It was alive, and it wanted her. She sat at the table, staring at its open pages, unable to resist flipping through them. The ink was darker now, bolder, as if freshly written. But what struck her most were the margins. They were no longer empty. Symbols and scribbles appeared where there had been nothing before, as though someone had crept in during the night and filled them with secrets. Using her phone, she tried to translate the Latin phrases. Words jumped out at her. Night, invoke, blood. Each fragment was like a puzzle piece she wished she hadn't uncovered. Her eyes caught on a single line, written carefully at the very bottom of the page as though meant to be a footnote. Nolite aperier quat clausum est. Her phone translated the words into English. Do not open what is closed. The warning made her throat tighten. What was it referring to? The diary itself? Or something else still hidden in the house? Her mind raced. She remembered the basement, the door that had always remained locked, the one her grandparents had told her never to bother with. And then, as if in response to her thoughts, the sound returned. That faint, steady scratching of a pen against paper. This time it was coming from the direction of the basement door. Mariana's pulse thundered as she crept toward it, phone light in hand. The old wood loomed before her, the lock rusted but still intact. She pressed her ear against the door. Silence. Then a single exhale. Slow. Heavy. Someone, or something, was breathing on the other side. Her hands shook as she backed away. The words at the bottom of the page replayed in her mind, colder each time. Do not open what is closed. But she knew deep down the warning was no longer meant to stop her. It was daring her. Exhaustion finally overcame Mariana, though fear gnawed at her every breath. She drifted off in the early hours of the morning, the diary still open on the table beside her. But sleep offered no refuge. She found herself standing in a vast chamber lit only by candles. Their flames dripped red wax, staining the stone floor like blood. The walls were covered in twisted symbols, the same ones she had seen in the diary, and they seemed to writhe whenever she looked away. At the center of the room stood a circle of hooded figures. They chanted in unison, their voices low and guttural, speaking a language that felt both alien and terrifyingly familiar. The sound dug into her mind, pulling at her like chains. Mariana tried to move, but her arms and legs were bound to a wooden chair. Beneath her feet, carved into the ground, was the same ritual circle she had glimpsed in the diary. The chanting stopped all at once. Every hooded head turned toward her. One figure stepped forward, holding the diary in its hands. Pages fluttered open by themselves, and words began to form in red ink, flowing as though written in blood. Her eyes widened as she read the name at the top of the page. Mariana. She tried to scream, but no sound escaped her throat. The hooded figure leaned closer, its face hidden in shadow. In a voice that seemed to echo from inside her own skull, it whispered, "You didn't find the diary. The diary found you." The chanting resumed, faster, louder, overwhelming. The candles extinguished in an instant, plunging her into absolute darkness. Mariana jolted awake at the dining table, drenched in sweat, her heart hammering against her ribs. The diary still lay open before her, but something had changed. At the bottom of the page, written in fresh, trembling letters, was a new line. "The dream is only the beginning." The morning light brought no comfort. Mariana stumbled into the bathroom, hoping cold water on her face would wash away the heaviness of the nightmare. She turned on the faucet, splashed her skin, and finally dared to lift her gaze to the mirror. Her reflection stared back, but it wasn't hers. Her skin looked pale, almost gray, her eyes sunken and rimmed with dark circles. And then her reflection moved differently. While she stood frozen, expression blank, the image in the mirror smiled. A slow, deliberate, unnatural smile. Mariana's stomach dropped. She stepped back, but the reflection didn't follow. It lingered, grinning at her with a malice she couldn't explain. Her breath came quick and shallow. Against her better judgment, she raised her hand toward the glass. The reflection didn't mimic her. Instead, it pressed its own hand against the other side of the mirror, leaving behind a dark smear that looked like ash. She gasped and stumbled backward. When she blinked, the reflection was normal again, mirroring her every move. But the stain remained, clinging to the glass, no matter how many times she rubbed at it. Heart pounding, she fled the bathroom and hurried to the dining room. The diary was waiting for her, wide open. On the page, a new line had appeared in heavy script. "Your image no longer belongs to you." Mariana collapsed into the chair, tears welling in her eyes. Every page, every word was consuming a piece of her. And the diary wasn't just documenting her life anymore. It was rewriting it. That night, Mariana locked herself in her room, determined not to touch the diary again. She shoved it onto the dining table and tried to bury herself under the blankets. But no amount of distance made her feel safe. Hours passed in silence until she heard it. The unmistakable sound of a pen moving across paper. Steady. Relentless. Her chest tightened. The sound wasn't coming from her room. It was drifting down the hallway toward the dining room. Every instinct told her to stay put. But fear and curiosity dragged her to her feet. Barefoot, she crept through the corridor, the cold wooden floor sending chills up her legs. The closer she got, the louder it became. When she stepped into the dining room, her blood ran cold. The diary was open on the table. And a fountain pen, its metal tip glinting faintly in the moonlight, was gliding across the page by itself. No hand held it, yet words appeared in bold, deliberate strokes. Mariana stood frozen, watching the pen scrawl faster and faster until it finally stopped, dropping to the side with a metallic clink. Her heart hammered as she forced herself to step closer. The ink was still wet, the words fresh. "She is ready." Mariana staggered back, her knees threatening to give way. The diary wasn't just alive, it was preparing something. And on the margin of the page, as though branded into the paper with fire, a crude sketch appeared. A door. The same door to the basement. Mariana told herself she wouldn't touch the diary again. She promised she'd keep it closed, hidden away. But that night, she woke with the undeniable feeling that the book wasn't waiting for her anymore. It was working on its own. She crept into the hallway and froze at the sight before her. The dining room was faintly lit by the moon, and there it was, the diary wide open. The pages were turning by themselves, stopping only long enough for new lines to appear, as though an invisible hand was feverishly writing. No pen, no ink. The words burned themselves into the paper, glowing faintly before sinking into the page like scars. Mariana's pulse thundered in her ears as she stepped closer, against every instinct screaming to run. She read the fresh line that had just appeared. "You are already part of the story." Her mouth went dry. It wasn't documenting the past. It was writing her present. The pages turned again, stopping at fragmented sentences that felt more like commands than records. The door will be opened. The name will be called. The offering will be chosen. Her knees buckled and she stumbled back. The diary snapped shut with a sudden force, the sound cracking through the room like thunder. The silence that followed was unbearable. Mariana knew with sick certainty that she was no longer reading a diary. She was living inside it. The following morning, Mariana sat on the porch, drained and hollow. She hadn't slept a minute. Her eyes burned, but it wasn't exhaustion that weighed her down. It was the certainty that the diary was no longer waiting for her to open it. It was moving forward, with or without her. Around noon, a knock came at the gate. It was Helena, the elderly neighbor who had lived next door for decades. Frail and hunched, leaning on a wooden cane, she rarely left her house. Yet that day she insisted on speaking with Mariana. "Forgive me for intruding," the old woman said, her voice shaking. "But are you all right? Something about your house, it feels different." Mariana forced a weak smile, but Helena's eyes lingered, sharp and searching. They were eyes that had seen too much. They sat together on the porch. For a long time neither spoke. Then, in a hushed, almost conspiratorial tone, Helena broke the silence. "This house, it's not just old. It's marked. I heard stories when I was a girl. Strange things happen here. People who lived before you, they vanished without a trace." Mariana's stomach turned. Helena clutched her cane tighter and went on. "They said there was a man, a scholar of the dark arts. He kept records, symbols, names. Some swore he performed rituals in the basement. Others whispered he wrote in a cursed diary." Mariana's hands trembled in her lap. She hadn't told Helena a word about the diary, yet the old woman described it perfectly. "They said the diary chose whoever found it," Helena continued, her eyes glistening with fear. "And once it did, that person's life was no longer their own." Mariana tried to protest, but her voice cracked. Helena leaned closer, her grip surprisingly strong for someone her age. "If you found it, child, close it. Close it and never open it again. Do it while there's still time." The words hung heavy in the air. Then Helena stood, her cane tapping softly against the ground as she hobbled away. Mariana watched her disappear beyond the gate, heart pounding. The warning should have brought comfort. But deep inside she already knew. It was too late. Helena's warning haunted Mariana all day. She tried to resist, to stay away from the diary, but the weight of its presence was unbearable. By nightfall, she found herself back at the table, staring at its worn leather cover as if it were staring back at her. Finally, with trembling hands, she opened it again. At first, it was the same. Frantic handwriting, fragmented thoughts, and cryptic drawings. But then she noticed something strange. Between certain entries there were gaps. Not empty pages, missing ones. Torn out, leaving behind jagged stubs of paper clinging to the spine. Her pulse quickened. Why would someone rip out parts of the diary? What was so terrible that it couldn't remain? She leaned closer, running her fingers over the ragged edges. On one torn page, faint remnants of ink clung to the paper fibers. She squinted, just able to make out fragments. Sacrifice. Blood. The final door. Her heart slammed against her ribs. She snapped the book shut and shoved it away, but the images clung to her mind. And then the house responded. The overhead light flickered 3 times before going out, plunging her into darkness. The only glow came from the thin wash of moonlight seeping through the window. In that silence she heard it. Not footsteps. Not creaking wood. Breathing. Oh, steady. Coming from the basement. Her whole body trembled as she backed away from the door. The words from the diary gnawed at her thoughts. The final door. Whatever was missing from those pages wasn't gone. It was waiting. The sound from the basement wouldn't leave her head. Every night it grew louder, a slow and steady breath, as though the house itself was alive. Mariana tried to ignore it, but on Friday, just past midnight, she couldn't resist anymore. Lantern in hand, she stood before the basement door. The lock was rusted, but the old key still hung on a nail beside it, left there years ago by her grandparents. Her fingers shook as she turned it. The lock gave way with a sharp click, and a rush of icy air seeped through the gap. It smelled of earth, damp stone, and something metallic like rusted iron or blood. She descended the narrow steps. Each one creaked beneath her, and it felt less like she was entering a basement and more like she was being swallowed whole. At the bottom, her lantern revealed walls of rough stone, covered in markings. Symbols she had already seen in the diary. Some carved into the stone itself, others painted in a dark, dried substance that hadn't faded with time. Her eyes were drawn to the center of the floor. A circle burned into the stone, blackened edges still faintly scorched, as though seared by fire long ago. Inside it, a twisted design. A cross inverted, wrapped in a maze of lines that spiraled inward. Mariana froze. It was the same symbol that had appeared in her dreams. The same symbol she had seen written in the diary. Kneeling closer, she felt the stone. To her horror, it pulsed beneath her palm, like a living heartbeat buried under the floor. She recoiled, gasping for air. Then her light caught something else. In the very center of the circle, half buried in stone, was a small iron medallion. Blackened, corroded, but intact. Surrounding it were words etched into the ground in Latin. "Do not open what is closed." Her breath hitched. The warning wasn't just on the pages of the diary. It was carved into the very foundation of the house. And she knew, deep down, that if that medallion was ever removed, nothing would be able to stop what was trapped beneath it. Mariana locked the basement door and swore she'd never open it again. But that night, the house proved it didn't care about her promises. Lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, she heard it. A voice, soft, raspy, calling her name. Mariana. Her blood froze. It wasn't coming from inside her room. It was coming from the hallway just outside her door. She sat up slowly, her breath shallow. The voice came again, closer this time, pressed against the wood as if whispering directly through it. "Mariana, open the door." Her heart hammered. It wasn't just the words that terrified her, it was the tone. The voice was familiar. It carried a cadence she almost recognized, like it was mimicking someone she once knew. But twisted, drawn out, distorted in a way no human throat could produce. She staggered back, clutching her chest. Then the voice spoke again, sharper, stronger. "You found me. You freed me." Tears welled in her eyes. She pressed her palms against her ears, but the words weren't coming through sound alone. They slithered into her head, into her very thoughts. On the desk across the room, the diary snapped open, pages whipping wildly before settling on a fresh line. The ink bled into the paper as though seared there. "The door will be opened." The voice outside fell silent. But the silence was worse. Mariana knew she couldn't keep it out forever. Whatever stood behind that door wasn't going to wait. It was only a matter of time before it came in. By the next morning, Mariana's resolve was gone. She couldn't face the house alone any longer. With trembling hands, she made her way to the small parish a few blocks away. Father Miguel welcomed her inside. The church was quiet, the air thick with incense, candles flickering against the stained glass. But the moment Mariana mentioned the diary, his expression darkened. "A diary?" he repeated, his tone unusually sharp. Mariana poured everything out. The names crossed off, the missing pages, the voices calling to her in the night, the basement with its scorched circle. As she spoke, she watched the priest's face grow heavier. He didn't look surprised. He looked like a man remembering something he had hoped to forget. When she finished, the silence between them felt unbearable. Father Miguel closed his eyes, whispering a short prayer under his breath before finally speaking. "That book should never have been opened. It doesn't belong to you, it doesn't belong to anyone." Her chest tightened. "What do I do?" she asked, desperate. "I can't get rid of it. The more I try, the closer it clings." The priest shook his head. "Objects like that aren't simply thrown away. They bind themselves to the one who awakens them." He stood, steadying himself against the pew, his hand trembling slightly. "I'll come to your house," he said at last. "But understand this, if what you told me is true, it may already be too late to contain it." That afternoon, when they reached the front of her house, Father Miguel stopped on the porch. His gaze lingered on the facade as though the building itself were breathing. He clutched his crucifix, muttering a prayer in Latin. Finally he spoke, his voice heavy with unease. "This house, it doesn't want me to enter." And then, with a deep breath, he stepped inside. Father Miguel moved cautiously through the house, sprinkling holy water as he whispered prayers under his breath. Mariana followed closely, her steps unsteady, her body heavy as if every movement cost her strength. When they reached the dining room, the priest froze. The diary lay closed on the table, yet its presence radiated like heat from a fire. He didn't touch it. He only stared, his jaw tight, his knuckles white around the crucifix. "This is no ordinary object," he murmured. "It wasn't written by mortal hands alone." Mariana's arms suddenly burned. She cried out, pulling up her sleeve. Lines were etching themselves into her skin, thin, red marks curling into shapes, forming the same symbols that covered the basement walls. Father Miguel's face paled. He raised his crucifix higher. "It's begun," he whispered. "It's claiming you." Mariana stumbled to the mirror in the hallway. Her reflection made her choke on a sob. The symbols glowed faintly across her skin like firebrands. And for just a second, her eyes turned black, swallowing all color. "What's happening to me?" she cried, her voice cracking. The priest placed a trembling hand on her shoulder, steadying her. "Every page you turned, every word you read strengthened the bond. The book no longer needs the house. It no longer needs to hide. It has found its vessel." Tears streamed down Mariana's face. She wanted to believe she still had control, but deep inside she could feel it. Something moving beneath her skin, pulsing with her heartbeat, tightening its grip on her soul. The diary suddenly snapped open by itself. The pages whipped forward until they landed on a single phrase, scrawled across the paper like a verdict. "She is already mine." That night, Father Miguel refused to leave. He sat in the living room, Bible in one hand and crucifix in the other, whispering prayers into the heavy silence. Mariana lay curled on the couch, her body weak, her skin still branded with faint, glowing marks. Just after midnight, the air shifted. A chill swept through the house, sharp enough to sting their skin. The wind outside fell completely still, yet the curtains swayed as though stirred by unseen hands. Mariana sat up, her chest tight. That's when she saw it. Candles. Dozens of them, scattered throughout the room, on shelves, on the floor, on the table. She hadn't placed them there. Neither had the priest. And one by one, they burst into flame, without matches, without fire, igniting in perfect rhythm as though answering a silent command. The glow spread across the walls, revealing what had always been hidden. Symbols etched into the plaster, invisible until now. Twisting shapes and words in Latin sprawled across every corner, glowing faintly in the flickering light. Father Miguel's face drained of color. "It's preparing the ground," he muttered. The candles flickered in unison, their flames stretching unnaturally high. Shadows danced across the walls, twisting into human forms, hooded figures swaying as if chanting silently, their faceless heads all turned toward Mariana. The diary slammed open on the table. Its pages turned furiously, stopping on one covered in the same symbols glowing across the room. The flames grew taller. The whispers returned, not from one place but from everywhere at once. Mariana clutched her ears, shaking, but the voices only grew louder inside her head. The room was no longer a home. It had become a temple. And Mariana realized, with gut-wrenching dread, that she wasn't just a witness. She was the offering. The following morning, a frantic knock rattled Mariana's door. She opened it to find Helena's son, his face pale, his voice trembling. "Have you seen my mother? She didn't come home last night." Mariana's stomach dropped. Helena, the elderly neighbor who had warned her about the diary, had vanished. Father Miguel stepped forward, trying to calm the young man, promising they would help search. But Mariana's chest tightened with an awful certainty. She didn't need proof. She already knew. Later that day, she walked to the edge of her yard, where her property bordered Helena's. That's when she saw them, faint impressions in the dirt. Footprints. But not normal ones. They dragged, uneven, as if someone had been pulled across the ground. The trail led straight to the basement door. Her body turned cold. She stumbled back, whispering, she was taken down there. The priest found her moments later, shaking, pointing at the door. His expression hardened as he gripped his crucifix tighter. "This is how it begins," he said grimly. "There is always a first offering. A warning of what is yet to come." That night, Mariana couldn't escape the weight of guilt. Helena had tried to protect her, and now she was gone. When the house fell silent again, the diary opened on its own. The page glowed faintly in the candlelight, displaying just one chilling sentence. "The first offering has been made." That night, the house no longer felt like a house. It breathed. It pulsed. It waited. Mariana sat trembling in the living room while Father Miguel stood guard, his Bible open, his crucifix clutched tightly in his hand. The diary rested on the table, shut but throbbing with a strange energy, as though its leather cover were alive. Then, as the clock struck midnight, every candle in the house ignited at once. The flames roared higher, flooding the walls with light. Symbols appeared across the plaster, glowing in time with Mariana's frantic heartbeat. The diary snapped open. Pages flew by, faster and faster, until they stopped on one that seemed to glow in blood-red ink. The floor trembled beneath them. Mariana collapsed to her knees, her arms searing with pain. Symbols etched themselves across her skin, glowing like molten fire. Her scream ripped through the room as she clutched her chest, feeling something vast and ancient clawing its way inside her. The air thickened. From the corners of the room, shadows lengthened and rose, shaping themselves into hooded figures. They surrounded Mariana in a perfect circle, swaying in rhythm to an unheard chant. Father Miguel raised his crucifix, his voice breaking as he shouted prayers. But an unseen force hurled him across the room, slamming him into the wall. His body crumpled, groaning in pain. The shadows closed in on Mariana. The diary glowed brighter, its words searing into her vision. The passage must be opened. The house shook violently, the ceiling cracking, dust raining from above. Mariana's cries blended with the growing roar that filled the air. She realized, with a horror that hollowed her out completely, that she was no longer a bystander. She was the sacrifice. The floor split open beneath Mariana, thin cracks spiderwebbing outward, glowing red from within. A blast of hot air surged upward, carrying the metallic stench of iron and smoke. The diary burned with crimson light, its pages turning to ash one by one, though they never crumbled. The words seemed to dissolve into the air, feeding the thing rising beneath them. Mariana screamed as the marks on her skin flared, branding her flesh with fire. Every heartbeat made her feel less like herself, more like a vessel being emptied out. The chanting grew deafening. The hooded shadows leaned in closer. The room itself groaned as if the walls were splitting apart. Then, in a single violent moment, the candles extinguished. Darkness swallowed everything. And from the circle on the floor, something emerged. It wasn't flesh. It wasn't smoke. It was both, a vast, shifting shape that twisted like living shadows. Its eyes glowed a deep, blood red, locking onto Mariana with a hunger that froze her soul. A voice echoed, not in her ears but in her mind. Finally, her body lifted from the floor, suspended by invisible hands. Her skin burned as the symbols carved deeper, glowing brighter. The air quaked as if the house itself might collapse. Father Miguel crawled forward, broken but defiant, shouting prayers through gritted teeth. The shadow only laughed, its voice rattling the bones in his body. In the basement, the iron medallion shattered, splitting into fragments. The last seal was broken. Mariana's mind fractured as she felt herself slipping, her soul drawn toward the abyss within the creature's form. The diary, now nearly consumed, revealed one final phrase before vanishing into flames. The seal has been broken. And with those words, what had been imprisoned was free at last. The house was in ruins. Shattered glass littered the floor, the walls split with cracks, the air heavy with smoke and the bitter tang of iron. Mariana lay motionless at the center of the room, her body marked with scorched symbols that now looked like scars burned deep into her skin. Father Miguel dragged himself toward her, blood streaking his forehead. He touched her face gently, whispering a prayer. For a moment he thought she was gone. Then her eyes opened. But they weren't her eyes anymore. The emptiness in them made his stomach twist. It was as if something else was looking out through her, something vast and ancient. She stood slowly, her movements stiff, unnatural. And then he saw it. On the table, among the wreckage, lay the diary. Intact. Closed. As though nothing had happened. The leather gleamed faintly under the pale moonlight seeping through the broken window. Father Miguel reached for it, desperate to end what had begun. But the moment his fingers brushed the cover, a violent force hurled him across the room. The diary remained perfectly still, untouched, yet pulsing faintly like a heartbeat. Mariana walked toward it. She laid her hand gently across the cover, her lips curling into the faintest smile. Father Miguel clutched his crucifix, trembling, whispering, "God help us." And in the blink of an eye, the diary vanished. Gone, leaving only the tattered cloth it had been wrapped in. Outside, the wind howled. Dogs barked frantically down the street. One by one, the lights in the neighboring houses flickered and went out, leaving the street cloaked in darkness. Mariana stepped out the front door without looking back, disappearing into the night. Inside the broken house, silence returned. But somewhere, whether near or far, the diary waited. And it would be found again.